Hello friends! Today I will be showing you how to make a bias cut skirt using my new Madeleine pattern. Basically what that means, instead of going with the grain of the fabric, which is usually up and down, we will be cutting it out on a 45-degree angle, which is called on the bias. It just provides a little extra stretch and a nicer drape. So in order to make this skirt work properly, you will need a very drapey fabric, such as a satin chemise, silk chemise, crepe, kind of anything along those lines. The fabric I will be using today is a gorgeous kind of forest green. I have no idea what it is, as I just got it at the market downtown Gwangju. But as you can see, when it's with the grain, there is no stretch. But when you tug it on the bias, you can see there is a gorgeous stretch. And quite a nice drape. Anyways, let's get into the pattern. By using either my color-coded tutorial or my layered PDF tutorial, cut out and assemble your pattern. The most important part of this skirt is making sure your fabric is laid out as flat and straight as possible. You will need a large surface for this, so it's best to do it on the floor. Starting from one corner of the fabric, lay out your pattern piece on a 45-degree angle, lining up the grain lines on the pattern piece with the grain lines on the fabric. Then cut out, making sure not to shift the fabric in any way. Repeat for your second piece. I ended up lining mine up like this to try and save as much fabric as possible. Being careful not to shift the fabric too much, pin both sides together. Since we will be doing a French seam, pin the wrong side of the fabric together on both sides of the skirt. If you've never done a French seam before, this will make sense as the steps go on. Since my full seam allowance is going to be 1.5 centimeters, your first seam is going to be only 1 centimeter. Because this fabric is so slinky, it's better to use a very narrow zigzag stitch instead of a straight stitch. This just helps the seam sit nicer while you're wearing it. Now sew that centimeter seam all the way down both sides. Once finished, it should look something like this. Then taking a very sharp pair of scissors, trim off that excess fabric, making sure there's less than 0.5 centimeter remaining. If you're confident in your rotary blade skills, you can use that instead. Once that's finished, flip the skirt inside out. So now the right sides of the fabric will be on the inside of the skirt. For the next step, we will be rolling the side seams out like this. Feel free to iron in place if that makes you more comfortable. I've placed 2 pins at the top to help the seam get started. All we have left is 0.5 centimeter for the seam allowance. Using that really narrow zigzag stitch, sew all the way down the side seam. This will contain those cut edges on the inside of the seam. If you chose not to iron, just take your time and slowly roll those edges out while you sew. And here we have our completed French seam. This is what it looks like on the inside. And this is what it looks like on the outside. Choose which side will be the back of your skirt and iron those seams toward that direction. I like to place a couple pins on the top to hold those seams in place. Next, we will attach the elastic. Cut out the length you need by either using my elastic guide or wrapping it around your waist to see what's most comfortable. For me, that was 71 centimeters. Trim the edges, making sure they line up flat. The elastic I'm using frays really easily, so I'm using a lighter to seal the edges. Line up the 2 edges of your elastic together in the center of your presser foot. Using your widest zigzag stitch setting, sew those pieces together, making sure to use a narrow stitch length. This just helps the elastic lay flatter, but if you have a preferred method of attaching your elastic together, feel free to use that. This is what it should look like when it's done. Now using pins, quarter your elastic. Using the seam as one of your quarters. Now repeat on the waistband of the skirt, using the side seams as two of the quarters. Making sure your skirt is flipped right side out, attach the elastic to the outside of the waistband, lining up the pins. Line up the elastic seam with one of the side seams. Once that's pinned, add a couple more pins between each quarter. Using a medium length zigzag stitch, sew the elastic to the waistband. I'm using a 1 cm seam. Make sure to stretch the elastic out to the maximum stretch of the fabric. This will prevent seams from breaking when you put it on. Ideally, you would use a dark elastic for a dark fabric, but all I had on hand was white. If any of the fabric sticks out past the elastic here, just trim it off. Take the elastic and fold it over twice towards the inside. So the waistband will lay like this. Now folding that over and slightly stretching it, iron the edge. Do this for the full waistband. Line up the side seams at the top of the waistband and pin in place. Sew a couple stitches into the ditch of the seam. Tie off at the back and trim. Do this for both sides. This will help prevent the waistband from flipping out. Now to make sure your skirt gets the perfect drape, we will have to hang this for 24 hours. If you have a mannequin or dress form, it is a lot better to hang it on that. But if not, use a pant hanger and try to make sure it hangs as evenly as possible. I also like to add a pin or two at the bottom of the side seams. This helps weigh those areas down a little nicer. Alright, now that it's been 24 hours, we will check the drape of the hem. As you can see with mine, it draped a little longer in the back than the front. I could trim this, but I kind of like the idea of it being slightly longer in the back. You can even use this opportunity to try on your skirt and shorten it even more. Either way, whatever you decide to do, I'm going to move on to the next step. If you have a presser foot that can create a rolled hem, do that now, and then you are finished your skirt. If not, I will show you how to do a rolled hem with a regular presser foot. Starting from the back of the skirt, fold up a piece of the hem by 1 cm towards the inside of the skirt, and pin. Placing your needle in the far right position, line up the edge of the hem on the right side of the presser foot. This should be roughly a 3 mm seam. Now using that super narrow zigzag stitch, sew all along the hem, folding the hem up by a centimeter as you go. If this is too difficult for you to eyeball, feel free to fold it up, iron, and pin first. Once you get to the side seam, feel free to use some sort of wedge to sew smoothly over the French seam. I'm just using a nail file. Once that is finished, it should look like this on the outside and this on the inside. Now taking a really sharp pair of scissors, start cutting off the excess fabric on the inside. You will want to cut as close to the seam as possible without cutting the seam. This is kind of tedious and time consuming, so try not to rush. Once that's all trimmed, you'll want to fold the hem over again towards the inside of the skirt and place a couple pins to hold in place. You'll want this to be folded so that the seam you just created will be as close to the bottom of the hem as possible. Then sew all along the bottom hem, rolling it over as you go. Feel free to use a straight stitch for this. and this is what it should look like once you're finished. You'll see one seam on the outside and 2 seams on the inside. Feel free to iron this, and then you are ready to take your new Madeleine skirt out into the wild. Hopefully you found that really straightforward. If not, obviously you can ask me any questions in the comment section. I would absolutely love to see your finished creations, so feel free to tag me on Instagram and TikTok. And of course, I love you. Stay true to yourself, and I will see you in the next one.